Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we have FastPath with us, and they will be presenting on best practices for setting up audit trails in NAV. And presenting is Liz and Nate from FastPath. And we just want to let you know that all of our webinars are recorded, so this will be available for you to review again or share with anyone towards the end of the week on our website, Innovia.com. And we just ask that if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to type those into the questions box, and we will get those called out toward the end of the webinar. So now I will turn it over to Liz, and she will begin our presentation.
Great, thanks everyone, welcome. So today we're going to be talking about best practices for setting up audit trails in Dynamics NAV. And hopefully my mouse is working here. So I'm Liz Pateo, and I am an employee of FastPath. And so today we're going to be talking about audit trails, and my background is about 20 years of Dynamics experience from both an end user perspective. I was once a consultant, and now I'm working on the ISV side. So I've kind of seen all of the different sides of Dynamics, from installation and implementation to post-sales and kind of working out there. And I have a lot of IPO and SOX experience. I was actually part of IT audit teams for a couple of different organizations, worked for an organization as they went through an IPO, took them public. And so really kind of got my start back when SOX first came on board a number of years ago. And then Nate Boucher, my colleague, is also going to be presenting. He's going to be doing the demo part of this presentation. And so he's our director of development here at FastPath. He's also a NAV security expert, and so he's been focused on NAV development for over 7 years. And he oversees the platform team at FastPath. So lots of good technical knowledge, especially from a NAV architecture in terms of how their security works and different things. And so he can also give some specific insights into what changelog offers and a lot of the differences between changelog and the FastPath audit trail tool. So I'm going to talk very generically about just any audit trail and how you would best implement that in your environment. Okay, so what we're really going to talk about is how to determine what to audit, talking about, being able to identify an organization's risk profile and what your high risk areas are, how to set up the audit trails, pitfalls and practices to avoid. And then what do you do with the audit data after you collect it? Because the collecting is almost the easier part. Okay, so lots of considerations when we're setting up the audit trail. The first is obviously, what should I track? Are there any other control options? So are there other ways to put controls around the data? Because one of the things that you have to understand is that there's a cost to audit trails, and we're not talking an actual monetary cost, although there could be in terms of making sure that you either have a product in place to do the audits, or maybe some consulting hours that might be spent to configure the audits. But also the data that's collected has to be stored somewhere. There's some performance considerations to take into consideration, etc. So those are all things to remember when we're setting up audit trails. And so one of the biggest things that you're going to hear us say over and over is that you really need to take a risk-based approach to configuring audit trails. And what we mean by that is, a lot of people kind of come into an audit trail tool and say, isn't it important that I audit everything in the system so I can really get a handle on what my users are doing? And we definitely don't want that to happen, because there's lots of things that happen in the system. And if somebody changes a fax number and the last time you sent a fax was 1997, how important is it to track that change? Not important at all. However, if somebody changes something like a payment term to make a customer aging look more favorable, or a payment term for a vendor so that a vendor gets paid more quickly and they get some benefit from them, then that might be something that you want to take a look at. Okay, so when we talk about taking a risk-based approach. There's a couple of different aspects of that. What's your organizational risk? Where are your risky areas of the system? Where don't you have adequate segregation of duties, where you might have overlaps where a person could have access to do multiple functions, and maybe they can create a vendor and they can pay that vendor. So that's when you want to start taking a look at what they're doing. Okay, and so you start at the reports, and what we mean by that is, when you're reviewing some of your reports that come out of your system, whether it's your aging or whether you're looking at, your financial reports and things like that, and you start to look at where you're vulnerable per se, based on either permissions that you've granted in the system. Maybe users have to have lots of permissions just because you're a smaller organization, or there is just a lot of risk in that area because of the nature of your business. That's where you really want to start putting audit trails around those areas. Okay, if you're not going to review it, don't track it. Okay, just at that point, it's really not worth it. And I'll give you a really good example. We had an organization that was actually using an audit trail tool. They had it in place, and after about a year and a half of actually owning the audit trail tool, we received a call, and we said, they said, we really could use some additional training. We really haven't been utilizing the audit trail the way that we should, and it's really kind of come back around to bite us. And it turns out that they had some fraud, and they had all the data, it was being collected, but no one was actually doing the review. So at that point, that audit trail really was worthless to them. Okay, so one of the things is establishing reviewers and who should be in charge of the data and those review cycles, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And engage the BPOs, the business process owners. Okay, this shouldn't be left in the hands of IT solely, or even just maybe the controller per se. The business process owners, the people that are directly involved in these processes every day, are going to be the ones that start to recognize whether or not transactions or data is changing appropriately. Okay, and so then when you start to set up your audit trail, make sure you filter down by entity and then even fields within those entities. So let's say you decide that you do want to audit your vendors. There's multiple fields on that vendor creation window, vendor maintenance window, vendor setup window, whatever you want to call it. Which of those fields are important? Okay, the remit address, the remit name, certainly going to be very important. Maybe the bank account information, where you're sending that money when you pay them. Other information, again, fax number. If you haven't sent a fax in forever, not so important. Maybe there's some user-defined fields that are just capturing simple data to help identify the vendor, but not necessarily giving you any risk if those fields are changed. Ignore them. Do not audit them. Okay, so that's kind of the approach that we take to actually setting up those audit trails. And then when we do that, we talked about the cost of audit trails. So things that we need to keep in mind are the performance considerations. Every field tracked has a performance impact, some more than others, okay? And what I mean by that is just depending on how much data passes through certain fields or certain tables. If you're creating thousands upon thousands of transactions a month for a specific thing that you're tracking, let's say you're looking at changes to journal entries and you're creating thousands of journal entries a month, that's going to have a little bit more of a performance impact than maybe if you only create 10 vendors a month. So maybe you can track a few additional fields on the vendor, in the vendor setup, but it's not really going to impact your system as much. But in the journal entries, if you're tracking and there's lots of data flowing through, you want to be maybe even more precise about the changes that you're tracking, so that you're not capturing a lot of unnecessary data. Another consideration that you want to give is, does the tool itself, the actual audit trail tool, once installed, once implemented, does it have an impact on user experience? So is the tool you're using, does it install into the actual application and impact your user experience, because it has to be called every time a window is open or something like that. So you have to think about that. And then what you track also has an impact on report performance. So if you're tracking, thousands upon thousands of changes, you're going to have thousands upon thousands of rows of data in your reports, and those reports are going to, maybe take 30 seconds to run when you first implement the tool, and then as that data grows, maybe they take a minute or two to run, or maybe they start to take 2 to 3 minutes. So we want to, and we're going to talk a little bit later about data management, but that's something to certainly consider. We go back to the example of if you're not really sure what to track and you decide to track everything, you could potentially have a 10 million row report that isn't going to be able to be exported into Excel. It's going to bog down your system. It's going to take a long time to generate. And at that point, how is that helpful to the organization? It's really not. So then you start to no longer be able to use those reports or look at those reports. So again, that's where we really focus on taking that risk-based approach. So I know that phrase is going to become a little bit redundant, but it's certainly going to be very helpful in your organization. And then we always recommend that you build a test environment, set up these audits and test them out. See what the reports look like. See if they're usable. See if there's too much data or there's not enough data. You were expecting to see a change on the report and it's not there. Why not? Did we forget to track a specific field? Are we not looking at the right table potentially? Or you know what, we're tracking changes to the journal transactions and I have all of these rows that relate to journal descriptions and I really don't care that this description has changed because that doesn't impact me financially. So let's get rid of those audits, okay? And we can see that in test, and it's easier to make those changes in test and get everything cleaned up before we move it to production. So we always recommend having a test environment and really testing that information there. And so the pitfalls, I've already mentioned, wanting to audit everything. Okay, that's certainly not, a good approach to take. So we're going to say it one more time. We're going to take that risk-based approach to make sure that we have only the relevant data on those reports. You don't want to use audit trail reports as a substitute for operational financial reports. Sometimes we see people wanting to set up audit trails so they can capture additional journal entry information or things like that. They want to understand, different pieces of the system, but that data is actually already in the system. Maybe there needs to be, a slight modification to an operational or financial report already available. You don't want to use an audit trail report to kind of generate that data. We see that happen sometimes, and that's just kind of a bog on the system. You want to really leverage the reports that are already available within your ERP, within your Dynamics NAV environment to get those operational and financial reports. Audit trails are not meant to be operational. They're not meant to be relied on for financial purposes. They are simply detective tools to make sure that your system is set up correctly, to make sure that your users are correctly processing transactions or entering information or, maintaining the data in the way that they are. Okay, so they have very specific uses. And then we really want to avoid inefficient audit reports. And what we mean by that, and what this 500 versus a million means, is if we go back to the audit trail setup and we've set up too much data, we're going to get this really long report. We're going to get a million rows of data on this report, and we're going to start to create our own haystacks. So when we know that something has been changed improperly and we're trying to find how that was done and who did it, for potentially being able to go back and do some training, or maybe educate that user a little bit more. Maybe they need some help using the system. It's going to be very hard to find that change. But if that report only had 500 rows of data, we can quickly and easily identify those particular areas of concern. Okay, so we don't want to create these big haystacks. We want to make sure that our audit trail reports are focused and tailored so that we can very quickly and easily see the anomalies. And what you're going to find is, 99% of the, well, maybe I wouldn't say 99, but maybe 96% of the data on your audit trail reports are fine. It's all good, and it's always good news. And that's what you want, right? You want to know that everybody is doing what they're supposed to do correctly, but there is that 4% of maybe areas where users aren't necessarily trying to do something misleading or fraudulent. They might just need some additional information on how to use Dynamics NAV, but it's going to be easier to find those areas if your reports are efficient. Okay, so this is the big thing though. Setting up the data and collecting the data, That's all great. But if nobody is looking at that data, then it doesn't really, there's no benefit. Don't even bother implementing an audit trail system, okay? So the biggest thing is you need to review that data. You need to assign ownership over those reviews, okay? And again, you can't just assign somebody in the IT department to say, hey, you know what, you own this data, review it. If they don't understand the business processes and the logic behind why some of these changes are happening, they're not going to be able to identify those anomalies. They're not going to be able to understand where there may be potential issues. So make sure that you're assigning ownership to the reviewing of the reports to the users that have some skin in the game, if you will, okay? They, you know, they would be personally held responsible, well, not personally, but they would have some responsibility over the fact if there were issues in the system or there were things being done incorrectly. And I don't mean that from a, I know this kind of sounds like, oh my gosh, we just want to look for, you know, bad people and punish them. No, it's absolutely not that. It's really just more of making sure that your system is properly, you know, being used and running, and there's, you know, areas for improvement pretty much everywhere. And so you want to assign that proper ownership. And then, are the reviews being done in a timely fashion? So if there are things that are on there that are critical, that can really affect your financial exposure, cash going out, cash coming in, etc., you might not want to set up reviews on those particular reports monthly or quarterly. You might want to look at those daily or weekly. Other things, like maybe who's changed a general ledger account, you know, something that can affect your financial statements because something could be posted as an income statement item versus a balance sheet item. Maybe those can be reviewed monthly, okay, or even quarterly. But you really want to assign a time frame, a time period to that, okay? And then what you want those reports to show are the visibility to the who, the what, the where, the when, and the how. Who made the change, what was changed, what the value was before they changed it, what they changed it to, when, the date and the time, and the where and the how are kind of the same. You know, did it happen within Dynamics NAV? Did somebody log into SQL and write an update statement and change your data? Did somebody connect via, you know, a direct SQL connection, eConnect, another product? Do other products have connections into your Dynamics NAV data, and is it changing that way? So you want that kind of visibility on your reports. And then finally, we want to talk about data maintenance. And so this, you know, so we set up the audits. The audits have all of this data that's being collected. We're reporting on that. We're reviewing it. Once it's fully reviewed and everything is being looked at, then we can talk about a data retention policy, archiving, purging. So, you know, you want to think about how much data you're going to be creating. Do you have sufficient space to store that data? How long do you have to store that data for? It might not be subject to the same rules as financial or operational data, so maybe you only need to store 1 or 2 years worth of audit trail data and the rest can be purged. You can archive audit trail data, so move it out of those live reporting tables and move it into an archive table so that your reports can run quicker. You can then, you know, potentially purge that archive data on a regular basis, but always remember to have a backup. You know, I know that's kind of a silly thing to point out, but it is always very important to have that backup, okay? So here you have contact info for me and for Nate. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Nate so he can show you more what these audit trail reports could potentially look like, talk a little bit about how you go ahead and set up these audit trails, you know, from an actual system perspective, and take you through the product. So Nate, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think I just did that correctly.
Yeah, I got it. Let's,
perfect.
See if I can show my screen here. Let me know when you can see that, Liz.
Yep, we can see that.
Good. Cool.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thanks, Liz. So she said we're going to walk through and do a little bit of demonstration on you know, specifically what the FastPath Audit Trail solution looks like, but really, you know, kind of the things that she talked about throughout that presentation are going to kind of hit home here when you go through and set up your audit trails, and then on the back side of it, go ahead and look at the data and see what data is coming back from the reports, and are we able to make something useful out of those audit trail reports. Again, as she said, if you're not going to review the data, there's no sense in tracking the data. So the first thing I've done here is loaded up what we call our audit trail application. This is the administrative tool where you take your first step in your audit trail implementation to say, these are the things that I'm going to track inside of my NAV environment. What I've gone ahead and done so far is loaded this up and connected to my NAV demo environment. And what you're going to see along the left side of my screen there, those are all the tables that exist inside of the audit trail or inside the NAV database. One thing to note, very similar to the changelog, we'll kind of point those differences out as long as we go. If you're using the NAV changelog or have heard about the NAV changelog, it's going to provide similar type audit trail functionality, but there are going to be some differences as well. We'll kind of point those out as long as we go. So just like the changelog, we're going to track at the table and field level. So you're going to see all the tables inside the NAV database. What I'm going to first do is scroll down to the customer table. So you can see it's actually blue here in my application. That means I've already turned tracking on for it. It is a company specific table, so you're going to see the company name in front of the customer, in front of the table name. If I expand that out, what you're going to see, the top 3 items are labeled in green. Those are the different events that you can track. So those are going to be your insert, update, and delete events. So if there's just like Liz said, take a risk-based approach. If you know this very exact scenario that you're trying to track only happens with update events, or maybe it only happens with delete events, only turn those events on, right? So that's going to be your first step in limiting your data, not only from a storage perspective, but from the report reviewing perspective, right? Let's just capture the data that we're actually concerned about that are going to satisfy the requirement that I'm trying to fulfill with Audit Trail. So those are the different types of events that you can turn on. The items here in the red color below that, those are all the fields on the customer table. Again, taking a risk-based approach, looking at the field level information when you're looking at customers. As Liz said, she doesn't fax anymore, so she's not going to try to track the fax number column, right? So we have that unchecked. We're not going to track changes for it. When you're talking about this data that's going to come out of your audit trail solution, every column that you're tracking is basically going to be a row worth of database storage. So if the fax number, if you do a new insert and you're tracking fax number, even if it's blank in that scenario, it's still going to track a line of data saying you inserted into the fax number column. Same thing on deletes. If you're tracking fax number and you delete it, it's going to track that even though you don't really care about it. Updates, you're only going to see the changes. So the changes that are captured on update are going to be only for the columns you select, and within those columns, only the ones that have value changes. So you're going to be able to go down through the fields and do the analysis on actually which fields you want on and be able to turn those on specifically. The other items here in the orange color are what we refer to as conditional auditing. This is going to be one area where the FastPath Audit Trail solution has a feature that the NAV changelog doesn't natively. What conditional auditing allows you to do is to further refine the data that you're capturing based on the user making the change or based on the application the change was made in. As Liz mentioned, our tool sits, there's a couple portions that live inside of NAV, but we also live at the SQL Server level. And so what that means is we're going to be able to not only track changes inside the NAV client, but as she said, if we're going into SQL Management Studio and issuing an update statement on some NAV data, we can also track that. So that's what we refer to as the application. So if you're okay with all the changes that are occurring in the NAV client on a specific scenario, but you're really just focused in on where changes are occurring outside of NAV, that's where we can do conditional auditing and say if the application is not equal to Dynamics NAV, so if I pull this down, I'm going to see the NAV client here. If it's not equal to that application, I want to track it. So we're, again, further refining the data that we're capturing and reviewing. You can do the same thing based on user. And you also have the option to do not equal to and equal to. So, if you're users, if there's just 3 users that you want to track changes for, best to do equal to, put in your 3 users, and then its tracking will only happen for those 3 users. Obviously, on the flip side of that, if we do not equal to, if there's 3 users that we're okay with the changes they're making, we don't necessarily need to track the changes they're making, but we want everybody else's changes, then we could use the not equal to functionality. If I scroll down here, instance, if I go look at the vendor table, you're going to see very similar information. The insert, update, delete events, user and application conditional auditing. Then the only thing that's different are going to be the actual fields. So these fields are specific to now the vendor table instead of the customer table. So that's really the difference. The process is going to be the same. So really that's the process of going through and issuing what you're going to track. Obviously, before you get into this tool and before you can implement an audit trail solution as an organization, you have to go through and decide what are we going to track, not only at the table level, but always recommended to also go down and analyze those fields and see which fields you actually want to track changes for. Another difference that I'm going to talk about between the FastPath Audit Trail solution and the NAV changelog, because we're built at the SQL level, we can also track schema changes that are happening inside your databases. So this is going to be if someone changes a table structure, or if someone implements a new store procedure or a new trigger on a table, we're going to be able to track all those type of events. So, you know, not on the data side, but on the physical structure of your database. If you need to track changes, we can track those inside of your NAV database. So again, another advantage to being not only based within NAV, but also have a presence in the SQL Server database. So that's the kind of the setup. Again, more of an administration type of tool to go in and set these tracking. The thing you're going to notice when you implement the audit trail solution is you're going to do the big heavy upfront lifting as far as, you know, deciding what we need to track. Then you're going to come in here, make the changes, and the amount that you'll be in here on the tool is actually going to be pretty sparse compared to the reporting side of things. Before we leave this tool, the other thing I would mention is kind of how this data flows and where is this data stored. So this is going to be specific to the FastPath Audit Trail solution. When you set up these trackings, and we're going to go ahead and capture that data once changes start to come in, that data is initially stored in a couple tables inside the NAV database. So those are really what we refer to as the collection tables. They're collecting the captured data, but it's not going to stay there. So we have a move data process built into the tool, and that move data process is going to move the data from the NAV database, and it's going to move it to a FastPath reporting database. There's a couple of advantages here. We're going to reduce the amount of data that are in the collection tables. So now from a performance perspective, every time we're going to insert data and we're capturing data and inserting it into those collection tables, keeping those tables as small as possible is going to help with the performance of inserting into those tables. So we're going to move that data out. Once we move it to the FastPath database, we're going to delete that data out of the NAV database, so we keep those tables that we're inserting into very small, and we also reduce the amount of storage that's happening on your NAV database specifically. So that's really kind of the biggest one of the biggest distinctions again between the two tools, between changelog and FastPath, is going to be moving that data outside the NAV database, accumulating it into the FastPath reporting database, and being able to use that data inside the reporting application. So now what we'll do is we'll kind of jump from the setup administration side of it, and now we'll jump into our cloud platform, which is going to be used for the reporting side of the house. So now that we've actually, you know, set up the triggers and we're tracking data and we've actually moved the data, now it's to the important piece of the side of things where we're actually going to be reviewing that data. Right? Again, if nobody's reviewing it, there's no sense in tracking it. What I'm going to show you before we actually jump in directly into the data on the reports, I want to look at a little bit more on the data management side. So if I come down into Audit Trail to my Manage Data screen, you're going to see these functions that are built into the tool. They can all of these functions can be scheduled to happen on an automatic recurring basis, or they can all be done on demand as well. So again, another big difference between the changelog and the FastPath Audit Trail solution is this data management. And this is very important when you go to implement an Audit Trail solution. One of the big things to be concerned with is going to be the amount of data that you're tracking, the amount of data that you're storing, Where does that data live? How fast are my reports running, right? As if I have a user coming in here trying to review data, is it taking them 10 minutes to get a report because we're having to sift through so much data? So within the change log, they don't have any built-in processes for archiving or purging data. And so within the FastPath solution, we've built that into the platform where you can go ahead and do those functions automatically on a recurring basis. So the first one we look at is that collect process, right? This is the process that we talked about that's going to collect the data from the NAV database tables and put it into the FastPath reporting database. Again, you can do it on demand by clicking the collect button, and then you can also schedule it. So usually what we recommend to clients, we're going to schedule this on a recurring basis, and we're going to schedule it on a daily basis. Really what that comes down to is if I'm running a report right now at 10:31 a.m., and the last time my schedule process ran was midnight on 8/28, or midnight this morning, then I'm not going to see any changes from the 29th yet. Because we're always going to operate off of the data that's in the reporting tables, not the data that's in the NAV tables. So we're not going to go back to the NAV database and issue queries and reports on that data. We're always going to issue that on the FastPath database where the reporting data is living. So in that case, if it is 10:31 a.m. and you have a critical change that occurred this morning and you need to see that on an audit trail report, you can always come in and click the collect button, and that'll move any data that's currently in the NAV database since your last move happened. So since the last move happened at midnight, anything between midnight and now will now get moved to the FastPath reporting database, and you will be able to see that data in your reports. Beyond the collection, you can see these are the three functions that we have built in for managing data. So the first one is going to be archiving data. So you're going to be archiving data after, really what you're saying here is, I don't really care to see this data on my reports anymore. It's kind of after the, if we're doing monthly reviews, maybe I don't need anything older than a month, or maybe I don't need anything older than 3 months. Really what this allows you to do is move that data out of your reporting tables, move it to a separate location, and then it's always going to be there for restore purposes. So if you do get in that scenario where you're maybe just keeping a month's worth of data, but an auditor comes in and they need to see something from 8 months ago, well, we can do a restore where we restore a set of data between two date ranges or between two dates, and then that data will again show up on my reports. So obviously the biggest advantage here is to improving your report performance. So those reports are gonna run faster, you're gonna get data quicker, and you're not gonna have to sift through so much data. So I'm not gonna see 6 months worth of data on my report. I'm only gonna see the 1 month that I'm really concerned with. So that's gonna be the archive side. Again, as I mentioned, we can do the restore. So if I come down to restore, I'm going to select my start and end date. That's going to be my date range of when I want to restore data from. So if there's a 30-day period from last year that they want to see data from, we can go ahead and restore that data and then run our reports again. And then the next time the archive process runs, it's going to re-archive that data. So it doesn't need to stay in those reporting tables. We can re-archive it, store it again. The last data management function is going to be the purge. So the purge data changes functionality. This is going to do a hard delete of audit trail data, and it's only going to delete archived data. So we're never going to delete directly from the reporting tables. We're only going to delete data that's been in the archive, and you're going to set your retention policy of how long ago or how old does the data have to be before I purge it. So if your retention policy is going to be every year, I need a year's worth of data, I can purge anything over 365 days old. Or maybe it's 2 years or 3 years, whatever your retention policies are, you can set those up here. You can also do it on demand. So if you're a little skeptical to do an automatic recurring deletion, hard delete of data, well then let's just come in here and do this one on demand on a recurring basis. Maybe you come in every couple months and do it and just clean up data. The biggest thing here is we're going to clean up database storage. So we're going to reduce the storage that we're requiring for the audit trail data and cleaning up data that you're no longer going to need. So again, these data functions, very important to an audit trail implementation. Best way to manage your data from an archive purging standpoint. And again, something that the NAV changelog does not have built in. So now let's go ahead and look at some data. So I'm going to jump to my data changes place. Really what this is going to allow me to do is do ad hoc queries based on tables, right? So if I pull down this table drop down, these are the tables that I've turned tracking on for, and I've also captured data. So I've gone ahead and turned on, like we were looking in the administration tool, turned on customer, turned on vendor, and several other tables here. So if I just filter for customer, I'm going to look at stuff in the last 365 days just from demo purposes to get data in here. So as I go ahead and do that, what you're going to see are the data changes that occurred within the last 365 days within my customer table. And really the fields that you're going to see on this report are going to be really consistent between all the audit trail reports you see in FastPath. And really what we consider key fields into data changes. So you're obviously going to see the date and time the change was made. You're going to see the table that the change was made on. In this instance, I filtered for customer, so you're only going to see customer in this instance. You're going to see the event, so that's going to be add, update, or delete. So those directly correlate with those 3 green events that I saw when I was in the administration tool. The company, if it's a company-specific table, you're going to see which company the change was made in. So you're going to be able to see that there. If it is a system table like user or permission set or object, you would just see system located in that company field. The key field, this is going to be the identifying unique key of the record that's changing. So in this instance where we looked at the customer changes, you're going to see that's basically the customer ID, the number field for that customer. So we can go back to NAV and look up data furthermore on that record if we need to. You're going to see the column that changed, the old value and the new value. So in this instance, the second row there, we see the credit limit change from 5,000 to 0. So that was a change that we made to a customer record. Again, those are one of the fields that I've identified as a high-risk field that I need to track changes for. The user, so this is going to be the user that went into the application or wherever the change occurred. That's going to be the user that connected and made the change, and then application. So we're going to see all these changes were made in the Dynamics NAV application. If we saw a user making a change at the SQL level, this would actually say SQL Management Studio. So really, again, those are going to be our core fields that we have when we're looking at all the audit trail data. If I come here and look at vendor instead of customer, if I have data, you're going to see the fields really changed, stayed the same, but now we're going to look at vendors. The other thing you're going to notice is some features here of the grids. You're going to be able to filter by any of these columns by using this top filter bar. So if I only consider I want to filter this report and just look at updates, I can do that. You're going to see, again, the same level of information. You also have the ability to export reports, CSV, PDF, or Excel document types as far as your exports go. We also have sign report functionality in the FastPath tool. So this is going to be another big change or another big difference between the two solutions, between the NAV changelog and the FastPath audit trail solution. So again, back to Liz's kind of demonstration about reviewing data and who's reviewing it. Is this data actually being reviewed? How do we show the auditors that we're tracking these changes and people are actually looking at this data? So that's where we can use the sign report functionality. It's going to capture the user making or signing the report. They can put in notes. It's going to capture when they actually sign the report. And it's also going to capture the criteria. So we're going to know they looked at vendor changes in the last 365 days on this day. We're also going to see any filters that they use. So we're going to be able to capture all the metadata around the report that was ran or the metadata that was used when the report was ran, so that we can have the full profile of what this user actually looked at and signed off on. The other thing we can do that's going to be a big advantage to the FastPath audit trail solution is saving and scheduling reports. So I'm going to go ahead and just do, this was my vendor changes. So I'm going to save this report. Really what it's saving, again, is the metadata about the report, the criteria that I selected up top, any filters I used in the filter bar. I also have the ability to hide columns, move columns around, change column sizes, those type of things. All of that data is saved in what we call a report definition. And then we can go ahead and store or schedule that. So I'm going to go ahead and have this sent as a PDF document to myself. I want to do it on a monthly basis on the 1st of the month. I'll say it's going to start now, but really what it means is on 9/1, I'll get the first report, and I'll get it on the 1st of the month every time after that. And really what that's allowing you to do is to get this data into the hands of your end users very easily. They don't have to necessarily come into the audit trail or the FastPath Assure application and come in here and run the reports. They can get an automatic email on that recurring basis with this. So I'm going to get an email with a PDF attached of this report at that point in time. The other thing I'm going to be able to do is have that sign report functionality directly from my email. So there's going to be a URL hyperlink in the email that I get with the document. It's going to be basically be sign this report in FastPath. You're going to click that. You'll be prompted with a browser that's just going to ask you for your comments. That's basically the notes section that we looked at earlier on the sign report button. And then you're going to submit that. What that's going to do is the same functionality as sign report in here in the application, again, storing, you know, the metadata, the filters, those type of things that were used when the report was saved and scheduled. But the other thing that functionality is going to provide of you signing the report from your email is now we're going to be able to see the specific scheduled executions that happened. So if it's a monthly, we're going to see it happen every month. So there's going to be 12 in a year. You're going to be able to see the emails that were sent. You're going to be able to see the signatures that are attached to that every month. And then we also are going to archive the report for you. And so what you're going to be able to do from the full profile is not only show an auditor it was ran every month, it was sent to this user, and this user signed off on it every month. But now we also have the archiving of the data. So if they want to go back and question something that happened in February, you're going to be able to see that schedule execution that happened on 2/1. And you're actually going to be able to see the PDF document. You're going to be able to click a download link on that and be able to see that. I'm going to jump over. I'm going to see if I have any of that just to show you an example. Let's see if I have any of that. Here you go. Here's some executions. So I have this schedule. It was a monthly report, and you're going to see the historical schedule execution. So it looks like it was a monthly report sent in every 1st of the month, and you're going to see I can download the PDF. So this is going to say, okay, this is the archived report at this point in time. So it's going to give you that full profile of the data changes that are happening, the user signing off on the report, and the archiving of the report. So you're going to have everything at your hands that you need to be able to satisfy any audit requirements or controls that you have that FastPath, the audit trail solution is satisfying. The other thing I'll show you here are all these dashboard reports. These come out of the box with the FastPath audit trail solution. Again, what it's going to allow you to do is it's just going to pre-filter for a specific table. All right, so I ran the customer changes report. It's going to pre-filter it for you. Again, you have your date range. You can also choose different types of dates, relative dates. So if I want to set it up and just run for the previous month, right? If I'm on the situation where I'm going to schedule this and have it sent out on the 1st of every month, I can use the previous month date filtering. So really easy to set up these relative dates and have them used on your scheduled reports. So again, those are all the out-of-box ones. They're going to tie to the most commonly tracked tables inside the NAV environment. Again, pre-filtered, unlike the data changes, the data changes is really used more on an ad hoc basis to look at data changes. So that kind of sums up the demo portion of the tools here. We looked again at both the administration piece where you're going to set up the tracking And then also we looked at the cloud platform that we have that's used to do all the reporting, scheduling reports, signing off on those type of things. We also hit on some of the differences between the NAV changelog and the FastPath Audit Trail solution, just to kind of recap those. Again, core functionality, really both tools are going to track data changes that are happening to NAV data. They're going to capture similar type of data points. So the table, the column, the old value, the new value, the user, all those type of things. Some of the biggest differences that you're going to see between the two tools, the FastPath tool is going to live outside of NAV. So we're going to also be able to capture changes that are occurring to your data in your SQL database outside the NAV client. We have the data management processes built into the application. So moving that data out of NAV into a reporting specific database, being able to archive and purge that data on a recurring basis is going to help a lot. And then really the reporting functionality, right? So you're going to be able to come into this web-based tool. You're going to be able to get all the data that you need from a reporting standpoint. You're going to be able to schedule reports to happen on a recurring basis, direct emails to your end users, getting them the data that they need to review the quickest, right in their inbox, PDF, Excel, CSV attachments, and then the sign-offs, right? So we're going to be able to complete that full spectrum. Not only are we just tracking the audit trail data, we're certainly doing that, but we're taking it a step beyond that, providing the full audit spectrum of being able to say, okay, I have these data changes I'm tracking, I have data tracked, here are my reviews that are happening, here are my sign-offs, here's my historical execution with archive reports. So you're going to be able to see all of that there in the FastPath tool. So at that point, either Liz, anything I missed, or Angie, any questions from any of the attendees?
Yes, we do have a couple of questions. So the first one is, how much space is generally needed for audit trail data?
Sure. So that's all going to be dependent on, what you're tracking. So that, that question is going to be relative, really per organization. Not only how much you're tracking, but what types of table. Is it setup or configuration data? Is it transactional type of data? So it's really going to depend on what tables you're tracking, how often are changes made in that table. But from a kind of just a baseline perspective of what we refer to from a pure storage perspective, we always say about 1 million rows worth of audit trail data is about 1 gigabyte in database storage. And so really what it comes down to when we're talking about individual rows of data that are stored in your database from an audit trail solution, so let's take a new customer, right? If I have 50 fields on my customer record and I have all the fields turned on and I go to insert a brand new customer, that's going to be 50 rows worth of data. Or if I delete that customer, that's going to be 50 rows worth of data, because you're going to capture the fields that you have on for inserts and deletes. You're going to capture each row once. Even if there's data not inserted, it might be a blank column, but we're still going to that's still going to be captured, and that'll be the same for the changelog as well. The update statements, again, focus on the fields you select, but only ones that actually have value changes. So that'll reduce it, right? So if you go and change the credit limit on a customer, that'll just be 1 row. So if we do the insert 1 row of credit limit update and a delete, we're at 101 rows. So, you can kind of play that into how fast am I going to get to 1 million rows? Well, that's going to be 1 gigabyte worth of space, and then that's going to grow, right? The same thing for archiving. That archive is still going to be on the 1 row per basis, so it's going to factor into your database storage. But again, the biggest thing is that retention policy and that purging process. So what is our retention for how long we're keeping this data? Do I have the purging functionality turned on and enabled? But as a kind of just a baseline from how much is it going to take, again, depending on your organization and what you've turned on, but about 1 million rows worth of data is going to be about 1 gigabyte of storage.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then, does the audit trail impact my performance?
Yes, so probably the number one question whenever we do an audit trail demo to a prospect or talking with a customer. But at the end of the day, if you're using an audit trail solution, whether it's changelog or it's FastPath or something else, there's always going to be an impact because we're doing additional processing that we wouldn't do without audit trail, right? So if we're tracking customer changes and we insert a new customer, not only are we doing all the processing within NAV to insert that customer data, now we're also adding on the tracking of that. So you're always going to have an impact. And really what the question comes down to, is there an impact on user experience, right? Are my users going in, is it taking them, are they noticing it's taking them an exponentially longer time to insert data or move about the NAV environment? So that's really what we're concerned with. Again, this is going to be a relative question, just like the storage question. It's going to be relative to what you're tracking from a table field perspective. Is it configuration tables, setup tables, master data tables, or is it transactional tables? All those questions are going to play into it. The one thing I will we always sum up from a performance perspective question, if you're using the tool as it's intended to track critical changes, mostly to your master data, configuration, setup data changes, right? We're going to, like Liz said, don't use audit trail data to replace existing reports that you can already get from an operational financial perspective. Use it for the specific items that you're trying to achieve. We haven't had any cases of current customers that have had performance impacts from the FastPath tool because of the tracking. So, always use it in that basis. Like I said, there's always going to be a performance impact, but is it noticeable to your users? Is it slowing down your system? And that's something that we strive to not do with the FastPath tool. And one of the reasons we built it at the SQL level to reduce the impact of performance. But really it comes back down to you as an organization making those decisions on what we're tracking to be able to alleviate the issues on performance.
Great, thank you very much.
Anything else?
We have no further questions.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you guys for the presentation. It was very informative, and I want to thank everyone who has attended. And just a reminder that it will be available by the end of the week for you to review again, or if you want to share it with anyone. And we do have some events coming up in September, so if you check out our events page, please register for any events that you'd like to take part in. We have Experlogic coming up on September 6th. They're going to discuss shorten your quote to cash cycle with CPQ. And then we have Marlene Mankin, who will be presenting on data cleanup with rapid start, populating data. This is her third webinar in her three-part series, so she's going to be finalizing that webinar on data cleanup. So thank you again for attending, everyone, and presenters Liz and Nate, thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing everyone on one of our future webinars. Have a great day and enjoy the long holiday. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, guys.